when the British Expeditionary Force found themselves trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk in 1940. All hope seemed to be lost. Evacuation efforts were underway, but it looked like the soldiers would have to wait a long time to be rescued. But then something unexpected happened. A flotilla of small boats from neighboring France arrived, risking their own safety to help the British soldiers return home. This heroic effort saved countless lives and is now known as the Miracle of Dunkirk. But what if I told you that there was another miracle happening at the same time? One that many people don't know about even today. It was a battle of wits between code makers and code breakers. And at its center was a secret team of mathematicians, engineers, and visionaries who were working around the clock in total secrecy to crack one of the most complex codes ever devised, a code that could potentially change the outcome of the entire war. It's a story of bravery, brilliance, and innovation, and it all happened right under our noses. So let's dive in and uncover the secrets of the miracle at Bletchley Park. This is a tale of espionage, intrigue, and the race against time. The year is 1939, and the world is on the brink of war. The Germans have developed a new encryption device called Enigma, which generates an almost unbreakable code that can be used to communicate military secrets. This machine is so advanced that even if you knew the language being used, you wouldn't be able to decipher the messages. Each letter of the alphabet is replaced by a different letter, making it nearly impossible to figure out what's being said. In fact, Enigma was so secure that the German High Command believed their communications were completely safe from Allied intelligence. They had no idea that a team of British code breakers was hot on their trail. As soon as the threat of war became apparent, Britain began recruiting the brightest minds from universities across the country to work at a top-secret facility in Bletchley Park, a sprawling mansion set in the heart of England's countryside. Among them was a young mathematician named Alan Turing, who would become the face of the operation. Turing and his team were up against the clock, and the stakes couldn't be higher. They needed to find a way to break the Enigma code before the Germans used it to launch a surprise attack. The pressure was intense and the odds were stacked against them. But Turing was up for the challenge. He brought together a group of brilliant minds, each with their own unique skills and experience. There was Gordon Welchman, a retired army officer who had a knack for spotting patterns. Joan Clark, one of the first female code breakers at Bletchley Park, whose sharp intellect and attention to detail proved invaluable. And Bill Tude, a mathematician who was instrumental in figuring out how Enigma worked. Together, they formed a crack team of code breakers that would go on to achieve the seemingly impossible. Their first step was to understand how Enigma worked. Once they knew the encryption process, they could start to develop a machine that could decode the messages. Turing was a genius, but he wasn't a magician. He didn't just snap his fingers and come up with a solution. He and his team spent months studying the Enigma machine, trying to understand its inner workings and find any flaws in its design. They knew that Enigma used a series of rotors to encrypt messages, but they didn't know the specific configuration of these rotors. This information was crucial because it was constantly changing, making the code almost impossible to break. However, after months of hard work and countless false starts, they finally got their big break. One of Turing's team members, a Polish mathematician named Marian Rejewski, had actually cracked the Enigma code in 1932 while working with the Polish Cipher Bureau. He had developed a machine called the Bomba, which could test thousands of Enigma settings in a matter of hours. When the British took over Bletchley Park in 1939, Rejewski and his team had already made significant progress in cracking Enigma. They had discovered that Enigma used a series of 3 rotors, and had even produced a list of daily settings for the machine. This was a major advantage for the British, and Turing and his team were able to build on Rejewski's work to create the bomb machine. With this information, the team was able to create a machine that could mimic the Enigma's encryption process. By feeding the machine known messages and comparing the output to the actual encrypted message, they could determine the settings that were being used. And with that knowledge, They could decode any future messages that were sent using the same settings. But building a machine that could do all that was only half the battle. They also needed to figure out how to use it. The team spent countless hours testing and refining the bomb machine, trying to make it as efficient as possible. They needed to be able to test thousands of possibilities in a short amount of time, and they needed to do it quickly before the Germans changed the code again. It was a Herculean task, but eventually they figured it out. The bomb machine was able to test thousands of Enigma settings in minutes, and the code breakers at Bletchley Park were able to stay one step ahead of the Germans. As the war raged on, the work at Bletchley Park continued. The code breakers at Bletchley Park weren't just decoding German military messages. They were also providing valuable intelligence to the Allies. For example, they were able to intercept and decode German naval communications, which helped the British Navy track the movements of German U-boats. This information saved countless lives and helped the Allies win the Battle of the Atlantic. But despite the importance of their work, the code breakers at Bletchley Park were working in complete secrecy. If the Germans had known that the British were able to read their messages, they would have taken steps to prevent it. So the code breakers had to be extremely careful. They couldn't make any mistakes that would tip off the Germans. They worked in complete silence, and even the walls of the building they worked in were soundproof to prevent anyone outside from hearing them. They were so secretive that when some of the code breakers left Bletchley Park at the end of the day, they were given special passes that identified them as clerks working in a government office. This was to prevent anyone from knowing that they were working on top secret military operations. Even today, many of the documents related to the code-breaking activities at Bletchley Park are still classified, so we may never know the full extent of what these brave men and women accomplished. So what was the impact of this secret work? How did it affect the outcome of the war? Historians estimate that the work done at Bletchley Park shortened the war by 2 years, possibly saving millions of lives. By being able to read German communications, the Allies were able to anticipate German moves and plan their own strategies accordingly. For example, the breaking of the Enigma code helped the Allies to plan and execute D-Day, one of the most important operations of the war. And yet, for all their contributions, the code breakers at Bletchley Park remained largely unknown to the public until decades later. Their work was so classified that many of them had to keep their involvement in the war a secret from their families and friends. It wasn't until the 1970s that the true story of Bletchley Park began to be revealed. In fact, the work done at Bletchley Park didn't just impact the war effort, it also had a lasting impact on the world. The methods and techniques developed by Turing and his team helped to lay the foundations for modern computing. In fact, the bomb machine is now considered to be one of the first electronic computers, and Turing himself is considered to be one of the founding fathers of computer science. But despite their contributions, many of the code breakers at Bletchley Park were treated poorly after the war. They were often seen as traitors because they hadn't kept the secrets of their work, and Turing himself was persecuted for his homosexuality. It wasn't until decades later that their contributions were finally recognized and celebrated. Today, there is a museum at Bletchley Park that tells the story of the code breakers and their contributions to the war effort. It as a reminder of the incredible things that can be accomplished when brilliant minds work together in the face of adversity. So next time you hear someone talking about the heroes of World War II, be sure to mention the name Bletchley Park. These were the people who worked in silence to save the world. And if you want to learn more about the untold stories that shaped our world, subscribe for more.